Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and with Final Fantasy coming out, there's one commander that I feel like is absolutely cracked, and honestly a lot of these commanders that we've been seeing have been pretty powerful. However, what I want to discuss today is Kefka Court Mage. This one seems pretty powerful, especially on the backside. However, before I do get started on this video, if you are looking for any of these singles that I talk about today, consider checking out my TCG Player affiliate link. All you have to do is click on it, shop for your singles, and that's really it. And following that, make sure to check out my Patreon, as there's a lot of great benefits as you get early access to videos, deck advice, and much more. And also I do have a free Discord, so if you want to join, the link is down below too. And so now with all that said, let's get us started. Let's talk about Kefka Court Mage. Before diving into the deck tech, let's first read what Kefka does. For 2 blue, black, and a red, it's a legendary creature, human wizard. Whenever Kefka enters or attacks, each player discards a card. They may draw a card for each card type among those cards discarded this way. So if somebody discards like a soul ring, somebody else discards a creature, somebody else discards a lands, you get to draw 3 cards off of that. Also, it's pretty cool. It is based off of each player, so it does count yourself. So you could go into a little bit of a Reanimator theme, whether you reanimate creatures on your opponent's side of the battlefield or your own. Not only that, it does have a pay 8 ability. Each opponent sacrifices a permanent of their choice, and you transform Kefka, activate only as a sorcery. Also, he does have a 4/5 body too. And I gotta say, if you're flipping him over, it is backbreaking. Kefka, Ruler of Ruin. It's a legendary creature, avatar wizard with flying. And most importantly, whenever an opponent loses life during your turn, you draw that many cards. So this could be pretty devastating if by itself, if you swing at one opponent and they lose 5 life, well, that means, hey look, you get to draw 5 cards. That seems pretty ridiculous. Drawing cards is one of the most important things you could do in Commander, and this does it very efficiently. Even though the backside is very good, honestly I think it's pretty powerful for what it is. I think the front side is honestly a little bit better and honestly a cool build around. You can make opponents discard cards, and when they do, you get to draw those cards. Of course, they focus on different types. This will also make your opponents have the tough choice of having different mind games unless your opponents discuss, okay, hey, I have an instant, you have an instant, let's discard that so he only draws 1 card, or something in that nature. It could be pretty political. Also, not that I'm putting him as the companion, but Obosh seems like a very neat fit because it is an odd CMC, and plus the backside focuses on life loss. Why not double the life loss with Obosh as your companion? I didn't necessarily do that in this video specifically in the deck list, but that is an option if you wanted to go that route. Speaking of routes, what kind of route did I go with on this deck specifically? Well, let me tell you. I did want to first focus on some staple cards, some that will help you gain advantage, like with some discard synergies. Also, I will focus on a little bit of a Reanimator strategy because you are discarding cards too. Why not to get some big threats later on the battlefield so that if you do flip Kefka, you could deal even more damage. And then later on, I will discuss some win cons. Alright, so let's bring it on. Let's first talk about some key synergy cards, focusing on discard or otherwise. So in this kind of deck where each of your opponents, including yourself, are going to be discarding cards, there's a lot of benefits that you could take advantage of. Let's first talk about cards that benefit off of our opponents discarding cards. One that easily comes to mind is Waste Not. This is the first card that I thought about when making this deck. It's only 2 mana. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, you add 2 black mana in your mana pool. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. This is going to be incredible in this type of deck because of course the commander focuses on specific types discarded so that you could draw cards. Why not get some additional benefit, whether making tokens, adding mana, or drawing more cards? This is absolutely just a perfect fit, especially because we have 3 different opponents discarding. There are 2 cards to consider that I'm kind of grouping together: Liliana's Caress and Megrim. Each of these are pretty good as enchantments on the battlefield. With Liliana's Caress, whenever opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life, and with Megrim, whenever opponent discards a card, it deals 2 damage to that player. So whether it's in the form of damage or life loss, these are going to be good because of course whenever we're attacking, or if we ever are really flickering our commander, for each discard they're going to be losing 2 life no matter what. The same can be applied for Fel Spectre. This is another option that is a little bit more. It'll make an opponent discard a card when it enters, but not only that, it's very similar to Liliana's Caress, where whenever opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So again, just consistently making our opponents lose more and more life can be pretty brutal. Of course, if you want to go a little bit more degenerate, and I don't recommend this, even though though. It is in the 99, it's not as a commander, but Turgid, God of Fright can be pretty useful because whenever they discard those cards, they do get to go on your side of the battlefield if they're permanents. But again, it's a very salt-inducing card. That's why it is a game changer after all, so I would be cautious about this one unless you're playing higher power games. You could also throw in a Tiny Bones. Tiny Bones is actually pretty good in this type of deck. Whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it, so it acts like a Leyline of the Void. During your turn, you may play cards you don't own with a stash counters on them from exile, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. So you could play lands because it is a play cards instead of casting them. Not only that, it does have an activated ability by paying 4 mana, making each opponent discard a card. So again, this is more of a way to make sure our opponents are discarding more cards, all the while getting additional value out of them. And I wanted to mention one more card that does benefit off our opponents discarding cards, and that's Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal. Whenever it attacks, for each opponent, they have to discard a card. For each opponent who can't, you draw a card. So most likely, with the situation at hand, if we keep attacking our opponents, most likely they're going to be out of cards in their hand. We get to get additional benefit of drawing cards. And if our opponent discards a land card, we get to make a 1/1 bat creature token with flying, so we can kind of surround our opponents with a bunch of bats whenever they discard land cards. Also, because each player does have to discard a card, that does include yourself. It's not a May ability. You also can gain some benefits too. So a similar card to Waste Not. Bone Miser is essentially the same thing, but you're discarding the cards, you get the benefits instead of your opponents. So whenever you discard a creature card, you make a 2/2 zombie creature token. Whenever you discard a land card, you add 2 black mana. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card. So this is pretty good. Overall, I have to say, having Bone Miser and Waste Not together is basically a match made in heaven. Another similar option would be Monument to Endurance. I really like this card because whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You either draw a card, create a treasure token, or each opponent loses 3 life. I absolutely think this is a perfect card in the deck because we might discard a ton of cards, whether we draw an insane amount with the backside of our commander, we have to discard a bunch at our end step, or if we're just discarding one card at a time whenever our commander is entering or attacking, we get the advantage of either getting mana, card draw, or making opponents lose life. And going to the red version of Bone Miser, Surly Badgesaur is another option that is very similar. It has 3 different effects. Whenever you discard a creature card, you put a 1/1 counter on Surly Badgesaur. Whenever you discard a land card, you create a treasure token. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control, so it acts as removal, mana production, and it could buff itself up. So this is a win-win for us, especially because we might discard a ton of cards at a time. So these are the type of effects you'll definitely want to take advantage of when making this discard deck. But of course, we're putting a lot of cards in the graveyard. Why not reanimate big threats? And so that's what I'll be talking about next. So of course there's 2 different avenues as far as reanimation goes. One, you definitely want to have a good amount of options that can reanimate cards. Something like Reanimate itself, all for 1 mana. You return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, all at the expense of life. I also love options that are cheap and effective, like Dance of the Dead, or even Animate Dead. You just enchant a creature from a graveyard and put it onto the battlefield on your side. And because most likely you'll have a lot of cards in your graveyard, Stitched Together is also a fine choice for 2 mana. You could either return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, which is okay, but if you have Threshold, return that card from your graveyard to the battlefield instead if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, which again, it's pretty easy to do. You could also go with a bigger reanimation effect like Breach the Multiverse. This is pretty crazy. Each player mills 10 cards for each player. Choose a creature or planeswalker in that player's graveyard. Put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. This does also include your opponents too. So basically you'll get 4 creatures onto the battlefield as long as they're in the graveyard. And to throw in one more reanimation spell that is pretty new, Afterlife from the Loam is absolutely incredible. Even though it might look crazy with 8 total mana, it does have Delve, and most likely you're going to have a lot of cards in your graveyard. This could potentially just cost 3 black mana and exiling 5 other cards, and it has a great bonus ability for each player. Choose up to 1 target creature card in that player's graveyard, put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. There's zombies in addition to their other types, so very similar to Breach the Multiverse. However, it can be reduced just to 3 mana. Very powerful indeed, definitely one I would highly recommend. So of course there's a lot of reanimation spells, but most importantly something to consider is what kind of cards do you want to reanimate. In this specific build, I wanted to focus on cards that synergize with discard or otherwise, because honestly, you could really just throw in any kind of good stuff, big creature, and it'll just do fine. However, I wanted to focus on cards that specifically focus on our strategy of discarding and making our opponents lose a lot of life, because remember, if we flip our commander and if we make our opponents lose a ton of life, we could draw a ton of cards cards, go to our end step, and discard a bunch of cards to then later reanimate again. So what are some of my Reanimator choices? So at first, this is a boogeyman to a lot of different people. Well, not really. It was kind of scary when it was first introduced. I wasn't too scared of it, but I know a lot of people thought it was going to break the game, and that's Lord Xander the Collector. This focuses on discard and really focuses on anything we want to be doing in this deck. It does cost 7, so that is quite steep. However, if we're just reanimating, it's not a big deal. It has 3 different type of triggers. When it enters, target opponent will discard half their cards in their library rounded down, and whenever it does attack, target player mills half their library rounded down, and when it does die, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control rounded down. So a lot of big splashy effects. Of course, the main draw is the enter the battlefield trigger, making people discard cards. That's what we want to do in this type of deck, where we have a lot of payoffs. Another option that heavily synergizes with our game plan is Archon of Cruelty. I love this card so much. I just think it's so cool that an Archon is riding like a wolf elk thing. Besides that point, what does it do? When it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, loses 3 life, you draw a card, and gain 3 life. This is big and splashy. 8 mana is quite steep, but again, we are reanimating it, or later on, if we just have the mana, we'll just cast it. It's not a big deal. It has a very big splashy effect. I wish it was for each opponent, but luckily it might have been too busted, so it is just targeting one opponent. It might be a feels bad, but again, this is definitely more of a degenerate deck, so a lot of people might just target you anyways. And because people might be targeting you a lot, your life total might be pretty low. Sheoldred the Apocalypse might be a really good option for you, because whenever you're going into combat or whenever your commander is entering the battlefield, you might potentially draw 4 cards. That is 8 total life you're gaining off of just that one ETB. Of course, if you swing in and draw potentially 4 cards, that's another 8 life. Sheoldred is a great stacks piece. Of course, not a lot of people like it because it's perpetually making them lose 2 life each turn whenever they're drawing cards. So again, this one can be pretty mean, but again, very good, and especially good in this type of deck. Also in the case for our commander, if we do flip it, whenever opponents lose life, we draw that many cards. So if we swing in, let's just say we draw 10 cards, we will gain 20 life off of that swing because we will draw 10 cards with Sheoldred. We gain 2 life per one. So overall, definitely Sheoldred is very good, especially if it's in your budget. Also, some other cards you may want to consider putting in because your commander does have an ETB is Displacerkin or Deadeye Navigator. You could either reanimate these or just directly put them on the battlefield. Constantly blink your commander, either casting non-creature spells or activating Deadeye Navigator's ability multiple times. This will definitely hose down your opponents where they might not have too much cards in their hand left to interact with you, all the while you have all the cards in your hand. So some blink options can be pretty powerful. I just put a couple in here, not too many. However, there are multiple ways of winning the game. Of course, you can just go straight up combat damage, deal a bunch of damage, and especially if you're flipped to the other side, you get to draw many cards and outvalue your opponents that way. However, there is a 2-card combo using Kefka, Ruler of Ruin, mainly because whenever opponent loses life, during your turn, you draw that many cards. So if you have this on the battlefield along with a Psychosis Crawler, well, you're basically drawing your whole entire deck, mainly because whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life, and would you look at that, you get to draw 3 cards, and because you draw 3 cards, each opponent will lose 3 life each, and then would you look at that, you get to draw 9 cards, and it just keeps multiplying and multiplying. But a fair warning, it is not a May ability. When you draw those cards, you have to draw those cards. So if your deck has more cards than your opponents has life, well then you could probably win the game from there. But if your opponents have more life than you have cards in your deck, I would definitely not go for the combo, because you could absolutely lose unless you have like a Laboratory Maniac, which can be an alternate win condition, of course. But I just wanted to give you this information because this is a 2-card combo that you could utilize in your own deck. So now with all that said, that is going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Kefka. This one is pretty interesting. I don't know if I'm interested in the art. It kind of looks like a clown. Again, I'm not too familiar with the games. Let me know down below in the comments, what do you think of this commander? Do you plan on building it yourself? Do you believe it's going to be truly degenerate, or do you feel like it's going to be fine? I'm more in the camp that it can be fine, but I feel like if you balance it out right, this can be pretty brutal to play against. That's why something like an Obosh might be a good alternative, making it a companion, so that way you're a little bit more restricted, even though Psychosis Crawler and Laboratory Maniac are odd converted mana costs, so that technically works in that restriction. But besides that point, overall I have to say this is a pretty strong commander, probably one of the strongest ones in the entire set. Let me know down below in the comments. Also, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.